Welcome back to my little channel. Today's video I'm going to talk about something that you may have heard already, but I'm going to try to put a little different spin on the whole topic. First off, what am I going to talk about? Well, I'm going to talk about how the Swedish government is suggesting to ban parts of its own history. The history of Sweden, that is. Because Sweden now seems to dislike runes and everything associated with their Rus Viking past, which is amazing considering it's a large part of what, well, Sweden is. I mean, they were one of the three major Viking factions, and the Rus, the Swedish Viking, was a very successful one. But because runes are now used by right-wing extremists, and you know, everyone left of Pol Pot is a right-wing extremist, therefore runes are bad, therefore runes must be banned. But they're part of their own heritage. So how can you so easily destroy your own heritage, your own history? Now, to explain to you why it is easy to do that, I would have to revert to showing a little clip of Yuri Bezmenov, in which he explains the concept of, well, the destruction of a culture.
Is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country.
After I've shown you the small thing of Yuri Bezmenov, and I know it's a little bit longer than I wanted to, but fair enough, bear with me, there's a second story I will try to bring to your attention to counter the Swedish government. And mind you, they are planning, suggesting, they haven't done anything yet, but they are considering to destroy part of their heritage. And in all fairness, they have already destroyed part of their heritage, because a lot of Iron Age finds from the Viking Age, for example, have been scrapped as old iron. And because of this, certain finds that were more than 1,000 years old are gone, are taken from us by the very people that are entrusted to safeguard them for us. Are they? They are, and I'll get to that in a moment. But first, let me go to another article written in August 2015 by Stephen Stenning. And links will be provided. I don't often link anymore, but this link will be provided, obviously. Destroying cultural heritage more than just material damage. Now, this one is written because of the actions of Daesh or ISIS in Syria and Iraq, but also because of the Taliban in Afghanistan. Because what a lot of people may not remember, Afghanistan used to be the home of Buddhism. Most of the holy sites of Buddhism were in Afghanistan, but they all have been destroyed as well. Cultural heritage is typically understood to be built heritage. Monuments related to culture such as museums, religious buildings, or ancient structures and sites. However, we should also include the slightly less material things. In event, stories, poems, plays, recipes, customs, fashion, design, music, songs, and ceremonies of a place as cultural heritage. These are vital expressions of a culture and just as important. And if we're going to look at the runes are more than just an alphabet. Because yes, there are the written angle 2 runes, I mean it's a way to converse words, but there is also a magical angle to runes. Now most people don't care about this, but once you start banning runes, you are banning more than just an alphabet. After all, the runes were used even up until, what was it? I'm not sure they were used in the Second World War, but they were definitely used in the Swedish war against Russia. Never mind that. It's not important. Well, it is important. It's part of your heritage, Sweden. How can you even suggest destroying that? Societies have long sought to protect and preserve their cultural heritage, for reasons ranging from education to historical research to the desire to reinforce a sense of identity. And this very sense of identity is the reason why Sweden wants their runes banned, because people using runes as a way to identify themselves are going against what the Swedish government wants. And funny enough, this is why in the late ages after the Second World War, so let's say in the 1950s, there was the Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict, with regulations for the execution of the Convention of 1954. In this, they talk about that we need to recognize and protect cultural heritage, cultural property. And the definition of cultural property is quite broad. Movable or immovable property of great importance to the cultural heritage of every people, such as monuments or architecture, art or history, whether religious or secular, archaeological sites, groups of buildings which as a whole are of historical or artistic interests, work of art, manuscripts, books and other objects of artistic, historical or archaeological interest, as well as scientific collections and important collections of books and archives, etc., etc., etc. Buildings whose main and effective purpose is to preserve or exhibit the movable cultural property defined in a subparagraph as a museum, large libraries and depositories of archives, or centers containing a large amount of cultural property as defined in subparagraph A and B. So A and B is the ones that I just said. This is all cultural property. So can you then claim that the runes themselves are cultural property? Well, the answer to that is quite simple. Yes. It was more than just an alphabet. It was a way to communicate with other people whilst at war, because runes have always been of a small group of people. Now that small group of people may have been all of Sweden, but outside of Sweden, Norway and Denmark, runes didn't seem to get a lot of traction. No, don't get me wrong, there have been places other than these where runes were used, but on average, these are the ones. So, Article 2, the protection of cultural property. For the purpose of the present convention, the protection of cultural property shall comprise the safeguarding and the respect for such property. Well, that sounds all good and well, but who cares? It's the Convention for Protection of Cultural Property, etc., etc., from UNESCO, so who cares? Well, Sweden should care, because Sweden is part of this since the 1970s. They said they would be part of it. Well, but it talks about armed conflict. Yeah, well, one could argue, what is armed conflict? Because let's be honest, if Sweden turns against its heritage as it's doing now, well, the Swedish government is armed. The Swedish people are not. One could quite clearly state that Sweden is then in armed conflict with the ones that want to respect and protect their cultural heritage. In Article 6, the distinct markings of cultural property, it's in accordance with the provisions of Article 16, cultural property may bear a distinctive emblem so as to facilitate its recognition. I don't think anyone out there doesn't recognize runes. I'm not saying you can read them, but everyone recognizes them. They often don't know what they mean. Therein lies the problem, because somehow it is considered to be a right-wing symbolism. Makes you wonder why it's considered a right-wing symbolism, but that's a story for another time altogether. It is part of this culture. And, well, the Swedish government did pledge themselves to protect the cultural heritage of cultures around the world. And whether they like it or not, Sweden is part of the world. So Sweden, if you are seriously considering to put a ban on your own history, you might want to recall the treaties you are part of. Now obviously I can go on, I can tell you about more of the 1954 treaty. And yes, I know that in 1999 the treaty got a fresh coat of paint, so to call. But considering that Sweden is already part of it since 1970, I decided to stick with the original one and not with the 99 one, even though the differences aren't that big. So there is a problem with Sweden wanting to turn against its own cultural heritage. But I think Yuri Bezmenov gave a great example or explanation as to why Sweden wants to destroy its own history. Because it wants to make sure that its people have no footing. It wants to make sure that its people will feel guilt and blame for whatever comes. And they can never stand up and talk back. Because don't they know that if you do that, you are an ist or an ob. It is time that we really stood up against this authoritarian rhetoric that we must be all the same and we must all accept each other, even if it means that we cannot accept ourselves. Like, share and subscribe if you feel so inclined. I'm more than curious to hear what you think about this one. Criticism, as always, is more than welcome. Links are provided, and I hope to see you all next time.